Hi everyone, my name is Gwen. I am the Golden Pomegranate. And I wanted to come on today, talk a little bit about some things that I've been thinking about to do with tarot and the astrology of the moment. Because at the moment, you probably know, we are in Aries. Now we're in Aries season. It's the beginning of the astrological year. And in a couple of days, in a couple of hours, we have the full moon in Libra. And I always think it's very interesting to look at how tarot relates to the astrology. What can we learn what does astrology tell us when we're looking at our tarot cards? So I want to know what you think about these things. I've just been thinking about mulling over some ideas, and so you can tell me what you think. Hi Claire, hi Terry. So we have the beautiful, I'll start with the cards. The first that we have is the Thoth Emperor. And one of the things you can look at the Rider-Waite-Smith Emperor as well. So one of the interesting things about an emperor is that he's different from a king, because kings are in charge of a kingdom, one kingdom. And emperors have an empire which is composed of several kingdoms. So it's a different thing altogether. It's kind of like, you have a captain of one ship and you have an admiral of a fleet. At least that's what I've learned from Battlestar Galactica. So I think that's probably how it works in the real Navy. But it's that idea, you have a king who is in charge of one area and an emperor who's in charge of many. And if you think about the great empires of the world, it's a lot of territory and it's a lot of different people. So while you do have to go out and conquer these areas, you do have to be a warrior, you then have to manage it. You have to be a diplomat. You have to be strategic and smart and also compassionate, because if you are compassionate to the people you have conquered, then you have a much better chance of people settling down and not uprising against you. So that's one interesting aspect of the emperor. And you can really see that in the Thoth Emperor. He looks very much like a courtly kind of character. He's wearing a beautiful robe. It's embroidered and it's a short robe. He's wearing hose and slippers. So this is not someone who has just come in from the battlefield. Whereas this one might be, because he's got armor on his legs and he has his robe. So he's in court, but he's much more martial looking. And I think his expression is much more martial as well, because we know that the emperor is looking at the empress, that these two cards look at each other. But if we take it separately, just think about the emperor on his own. He looks very wary to me in a similar way to the Nine of Wands is wary. And you would have to be. I think maybe that's where part of the strategy comes in. But I do think it's interesting in the Thoth Tarot, you have a much more courtly kind of image that you're working with here. And I posted about the emperor a couple of days ago, and a friend of mine on here, Naturally Nikki at Tarot 21C, pointed out something really interesting that I had never noticed before. So if you look at these two, now these are sun discs, which makes sense because you're moving into spring with Aries. The sun is coming up above the horizon in the northern hemisphere. So there are two sun discs, and they're perfectly even, and they're even with his hips. And that matters because a lot of times with the Tree of Life, we have an image of the Tree of Life like this, and you will see that people illustrate it by having a person in the Tree of Life. Sometimes the person is walking towards you, sometimes it's walking away, but it's, in this case, we'll think about walking toward us. It doesn't really matter in this case, but so they're located in certain parts of your body. And if you look at the bottom here, you can see Netzach and Hod, and those are associated with your hips, and that's exactly where these are. So Netzach and Hod, and that's balancing Netzach and Hod. So emotion, Netzach is ruled by Venus, so you have emotion, artistry, creativity, and you have Hod, which is the intellect. So it's a balancing of that. And right in between them, you see he's holding his orb, and that is right at the path of the tower. In between Hod and Netzach is the tower. So that's, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, Claire? It's really interesting. So that's right in the middle, the tower. And I have to say, anytime something like this comes up, I just can't. Sometimes I try not to say anything, but I just really can't. In Monty Python and the Holy Grail. So every time I see this, I think of the Holy Hand Grenade of Antioch. Because this is what it looks like, doesn't it? And then they have the Holy Hand Grenade, and then the little cross is like the pin, and then they throw it. So, and it's actually not, I mean, of course, Aleister Crowley and Lady Freda Harris, no, but it fits. It's kind of a fun way to think about it, because it does fit on the path of the tower, which is very explosive. So we have Aries, and this is our sun sign. So this is kind of our environment. And within that, we have the moon. Now, I like to look at, of course, all the planets are in different signs, and they are within this context. But I like to look at the moon particularly because the moon is closest to us. It has a lot of an effect on our feelings and our inner selves. So we can look at the full moon. The full moon is in Libra. So we have Libra energy within the context of the sun energy. And to talk about the card a little bit, this is one of the cards that Crowley basically recreated for the Thoth Tarot. This is Justice in the Rider-Waite-Smith, and he recreated it as adjustment. He changed the name and he changed the imagery. And he changed it to Egyptian imagery because, of course, there's a lot of Egyptian imagery in the Thoth Tarot. There's a lot to do with Egyptian mythology in the structure of the deck. Here you have the goddess Ma'at and her scales, so she's weighing a feather against a heart. And the difference in meaning between the two of these is that in adjustment you have the chance to make a course correction. And in justice, I don't really feel that you do. I feel that justice is, it's a very solid, firm card. And he is holding scales. But to me, this is just a very static card, so I don't see any chance. But there's a lot of movement in these because you have these spheres, and I think that gives it some movement. And you have the chance to make an adjustment. Hi, Heather. And one of the things that you can do, if you look at the bottom here, you can see there is, in the bottom of all the Thoth cards, you have a Hebrew letter, and you have the astrology. There, that is a zodiac sign. So the Hebrew letter for this card is Lamed. And Lamed, the esoteric name for that is the ox goad. So it has a really interesting relationship to the Fool, because the Fool's letter is Aleph, and its esoteric name is the ox. So you have a relationship between the ox and the ox goad. And this is the point at which, if you had an ox goad and you had an ox, and your ox was walking off path, you could prod it back on the path. Or you could say, oh, actually, I want to go on this other path here. So you nudge your ox onto another path. And so it's, all of that is still in this card. It's in the trump, but it's not brought to the fore in the same way as it is in Crowley's adjustment. So I think that's quite interesting. And within the context of an emperor, if you think of this as kind of the energy that we have all around us, and this gives us the chance to be fair, to be reasonable, to be balanced about things, to evaluate what we're doing. Because I think we've all known people who have made a decision and then they just carry forward with that decision no matter what happens. Even if it becomes obvious that that is not a good decision, that it's not going to work out well, and they keep going forward with it anyway. And that's, that is a really kind of unproductive stubbornness. And the emperor doesn't do that. So he is able to counter that with this kind of balance between, compassion and wisdom and martial and social, all kinds of things. So that's why he's such a good emperor. And you can also do a little bit of crossing over with these cards. I want to talk a little bit about the Zodiacal trumps. So I hope that this is not a word that I'm making up. But Zodiacal trumps are the trumps that are associated with zodiac signs, like the Emperor and adjustment. The Emperor is associated with Aries, and adjustment or justice is Libra. So with the majors, I've written this backwards, so it'll be forward for you, so I apologize. It's not the neatest thing you've ever seen. So at the top, you can see you have 3 elemental trumps, the Fool, the Hanged Man, and Eon or Judgment. You have 7 planetary trumps, and then you have 12 zodiacal trumps. And the interesting thing about when you list them all like this, you can see that the zodiacal trumps are all in order. You know, they're in order of the zodiac sign. Oh, hi, Nikki. I was just talking about you. I have to go back and watch the beginning of this. So these are all in order. But when you look at the planetary trumps, I've put them in order, the order that the cards come. So if you have a list of all your trump cards and then you take out all the zodiac cards, what you have left is you have 10 cards, 7 of them planetary cards. And if you list them like I have in order of the tarot deck, you see pretty fast that they're not in order. These are not in any kind of, they're not in planetary order. And if you put them in planetary order, then you mess up the card order. And I know that this is maybe something that doesn't bother a lot of people, particularly when you're talking about the Sadi-Hay switch. Because Crowley said that we should be switching the Star and the Emperor. I'm not 100% clear whether he meant we should be switching the paths or should we be switching the card. He certainly switched the letters on the card. But I just can't really reconcile that for a couple of reasons. And one of them is that you have cards in an order, you have the Hebrew alphabet in an order, and it just has to stay that way. For me, it just doesn't work otherwise. Excuse me. So what's going on here? And the first thing I'm thinking is that, well, they assigned all the zodiac ones, and then they had these ones left, and so they picked the planets that they thought worked the best for these particular tarot cards, because, I mean, they are not in order. But something to think about. We could talk about the planetary trumps another time in more detail, but it's really interesting to play around with these things. If you look at your Thoth tarot, and I don't know if this is consistent with everybody's Thoth tarot, there seems to be a little bit of a difference, but in the bottom, where you have this information at the bottom, you have the Hebrew letter and you have the planet or the zodiac sign. Some of them, when you're looking just at the planetary trumps, you will find that some of them are on the left and some of them are on the right. And it's only the Magus and the Universe that have them on the right. Now I can't remember which way it goes. Anyway, the Magus and the Universe have theirs on the same side and all the others have theirs on the other side. So that's something that I do to try and figure out what is happening with the cards and with the meaning of the cards. Is there a pattern when you notice something like that and you think, well, that's unusual. Why is that happening? So is there a pattern? And so there is a pattern, and I haven't really figured out, it's the first and the last. So do we switch those? How do we work with it? So what I would do then is just kind of fiddle with it, because I do know that when you're dealing with Kabbalah and the Tree of Life, and you're working with the Hebrew alphabet, there are a whole bunch of ciphers. There are patterns of ciphers that you switch things around, you switch the alphabets around, you exchange letters and positions, and that gives you, certain meanings, additional meanings. So I think it's worth looking into it, and I really don't think that there's ever any mistakes in the Thoth Tarot. The only thing I think might have happened is maybe 2 different print runs got mixed up at some stage, and I say that because some of the astrological signs look like they're handwritten and some of them don't. Some of them look like they're a little block. I don't know what you call those. I'm sorry. Like a printer thing, the print, they're actually done, they're designed and printed, not done by hand. So that's a possibility. But it's interesting anyway to look at. And the reason I'm telling you about the planetary trumps is you can actually get some information even when you're working with your zodiacal trumps. You can get some information from the planetary trumps. Because the Emperor, ruled by Aries, Well, Aries is ruled by Mars, and Mars rules the tower. So you might see some people, I see people on Instagram making these connections, and at first I have to think, Howard, what's happening here? And that's what's happening, is they're putting these together by looking at the connections. And so again, we have the tower, and we have this, this orb. So there's that connection. And there certainly is that destructive, transformative power of the Emperor. And 4, adjustment, which is ruled by lovely Libra. Libra is ruled by Venus. And so that brings in the Empress, which is also quite nice because we then have the Emperor-Empress pair looking at each other. So that's really nice. And then you have the kind of the beautifying aspect of the Empress and Venus and Libra within the context of the Emperor. So it's not just all fire and fury. There's a little bit of destruction first maybe, but a little bit of this has to come next. So if we have the Emperor, I'll make them facing each other. Okay, so we can look at other astrological relationships and see if we can tease out a little bit more about these cards. If we have Venus and Aries, well, Venus in Aries is one of the decans in the tarot. That is the 4 of Wands. This is Venus in Aries, which is, I think this is maybe my favorite card. I just love the green. I love the wands. And you can see why, because it's Venus in Aries, the mythological lovers. You can see maybe why there's a marriage in this image, because there is a coming together of opposite forces and kind of a healing from conflict. And I want to read you something really interesting from this book, The Ultimate Guide to the Thoth Tarot, which Helen from Occult Projects recommended to me. And it's a really interesting book. It's got the card here, and then it kind of pulls apart the symbolism on the opposite page. And it's very straightforward and really interesting. It does it for all the cards. And what it says here is evidence of squaring the circle. These are the wands. The suspension and reconciliation of harsh opposites. Also, the colliding of strong opposing forces that allow the wheel to spin. And so I think that applies directly to what's happening with the Emperor and his kind of ambitions, his ambitious energy. Now, the other relationship, which would be, get my cards here, Mars in Libra. Now, I don't think that there is a minor for this, but we can still think about what's happening. And there is a really nice quote. There's a really nice quote that I found online about that relationship. The lightning of the tower striking the seat of justice, a massive realignment and rebalance and a transformation. So I think I see a girl's face 2 in the 4 of Wands. Someone pointed out. Okay, that's the Thoth one. Is it in the background, like in the green? I'm afraid to ask now, because if I see it, I won't be able to unsee either. So yeah, so it's a lot of, I think the reason that I do this is you can kind of tease out the details when you look at the relationships and see what's supporting what is happening now with this full moon in Libra in Aries. Now, the full moon in Aries is also a penumbral eclipse, so it's not a complete lunar eclipse. I think that's what that means. And so that will have an effect. I'm not an astrologer, so I don't want to talk about what eclipses mean exactly, but I think that it does have to do quite specifically with your own chart and where you have planets, and maybe an emphasizing of things. The effect of the eclipses, I think, lasts longer than just a regular full moon. Okay. Okay, so that is really all I had to say. I just wanted to come on and talk about the relationships between these cards, between the Emperor and Adjustment. You know, what an Emperor really is. We could think about him being being a larger energy, a grander energy, but within the context of that, there is that balance. There is that courtly balance, that, you know, the diplomacy, the tact. And that's how you have a successful Aries season, rather than, you know, that initiating energy is really important. Of course it is. But you can't just constantly go attacking people and expect that to last. It's very ephemeral, that kind of energy. So if you want that to last, then you need to bring in the balance, and you need to be flexible. You need to be able to adjust what you're doing and where you're going. So I hope that was interesting. I feel like I've forgotten something that I wanted to say, but I don't see it. So thank you very much for coming. It was nice to see you, and I will see you in a couple of weeks for the next one. Bye.